We are expecting to hear shortly from Justice Minister Fraser. He's preparing to introduce what the government is calling generational updates to the criminal code. The amendments are aimed at intimate partner violence and femicide and protecting children. The CBC's Karina Roman joins us live from Ottawa. So Karina, take us through what's in these proposed changes.
So Bill C-16 is about 167 pages long. So I'm going to try and whittle it down for the audience. The overall goals, the government is trying to reinstate mandatory minimum sentences for some crimes while still being on side with the Charter. So some of those sentences that have been struck down by the courts, this is an attempt to try and bring them back, and I'll get to that in a second. They're also trying to crack down on crimes that disproportionately affect women and children, and trying to modernize the criminal code in the face of rapidly evolving technology like deep fakes and sextortion. They're also looking to make murder motivated by hate, including femicide, first-degree murder, even if there was no planning or deliberation in advance of that murder. They're looking to criminalize coercive control, which often happens as a precursor to intimate partner violence. And so if they criminalize it, the goal is to be able to maybe intervene before that violence turns lethal. In terms of criminal harassment, right now in criminal harassment cases, the prosecutor has to show that the victim, the specific victim in the case, feared for their safety, which is often onerous to prove. And they want to change that to show that a reasonable person in the victim's circumstances would fear for their safety. So they're trying to make it objective instead of subjective. The changes also include prohibiting the distribution of non-consensual deep fakes. There are many changes to increase penalties in this proposed bill for a number of crimes, including the increased penalties for the distribution of intimate images without consent. And as I mentioned, they want to crack down on sextortion of children by criminalizing the actual threat itself when a child is threatened by someone to distribute the child's sexual abuse photos or exploitative material. Now, on the mandatory minimums, which I mentioned is a really big part of this, as I mentioned, many have been struck down by the courts, Supreme Court and provincial courts, in a sense feeling that it violates the Charter because it's unreasonable and too much. And also, most recently, in a child pornography case at the Supreme Court struck down the 1-year mandatory minimum in that case based on a hypothetical future case that hasn't happened yet, but if it did, they said it would be the wrong kind of sentence. And so this angered many MPs, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. It was quite a big story. And the government's response in this bill, Andrew, is to strengthen mandatory minimum penalties by including the ones that have been struck down, restoring more than a dozen of them for a range of child sexual offenses. And they're going to do this by giving courts limited discretion to give a lower sentence where the court feels applying a minimum mandatory would be grossly disproportionate. Now, I think some critics might say, well, then is it actually mandatory if there's court discretion? And I anticipate that question being given to the minister when we hear from him. But that is one of the biggest changes in this proposed bill. Also, I'm sure aware, as many are, that there have been charges stayed in very serious cases where the case was taking too long. And under the Supreme Court decision, the Jordan decision, that is the outcome if a case is taking too long, with some exceptions. Now, the proposed law provides specific guidance to the court in terms of what factors it should consider when considering a case so complex it should not. It should be extended and should not just result in a stay of the charges. And in fact, it also tells the courts to consider alternatives to a stay of the charges when a case is taking too long, especially if the result of a stay of charges in a very serious case can create quite a sense of injustice.